Hello, this week we have three extraordinary readings. It's the 22nd Sunday of the year, and the readings that you can have this Sunday are from Exodus 3, verses 1 to 15, and that's the story of Moses' encounter with God at the burning bush. Romans chapter 12, verses 9 to 21, in which St. Paul talks about love, and Matthew 16, 21 to 28. Again, an important passage where Jesus invites all his followers to take up their cross and follow him. Peter, who was once a foundation, as we talked about last week, is now a stumbling block. That Jesus, having seen that Peter had some sort of understanding of what he might be and do, he explains to him that there's going to be pain and suffering. And Peter says, there can't be. It's not going to be. I'm not going to allow it. And he's lost the plot again. It's our spiritual life's rather like that, is we can have very clear insights of what's going to happen, of what God is calling us to be and do, and then we lose the plot. We want things to go our way rather than to go God's way. In the other story that we read today, the story about Moses' encounter with the burning bush, it is also another story about it's a seminal story, if you like, a story which is similar to many of our spiritual experiences. It's the story about how God gets our attention. I'm not so interested in how or why a bush might burn and not be consumed. I think that's a device of the story that the writers have used. What we see here is that Moses has his attention drawn by something which God has set before him, in this case the burning bush, whatever that might mean, and he has to make a decision. And we read in the text that he decides that what he's going to do is that he says, I must go and see what this thing is. And as he approaches it, he realises that he's about to have an encounter with God. And so we even read in the text certain sacred sort of ritual movements, like he says, this is a holy place, therefore I must take off my shoes. All our experiences with God are rather like this, is that God uses wandering around the world to be able to get our attention. And we have to decide whether we're just going to carry on chasing the sheep, as we have been doing, or whether we're actually going to step aside and pay attention to what God is doing. The spiritual journey, if you like, is when we decide that what we're going to do is we're going to try and pay attention to what God is inviting us to reflect on. When Moses gets to the place of the burning bush, he speaks with God, and God reveals to him his name. He says, I am who I am. It's a curious sort of passage altogether. All the texts say it could be I will be, or what I will be. What I think we are seeing is that this is the God who is, that this is the God who was, and this is the God who will be for all time. That Moses has to open himself to the encounter with God who is I am who I am. For each of us, we might ask ourselves day by day, what is it that I encounter about God today? I sometimes ask myself the question, what am I most grateful for today? Where do I experience God's grace? It doesn't usually take long to find something. Even having done that, you can then go back through the day, minute by minute, hour by hour, and as you comb through the stuff, you actually begin to realise that God is ever present with us, and there's all sorts of things that God is being and doing for us during the course of a day. The question about this is not so much about what we observe as what we're actually going to do with this information once we've actually got it. Are we actually going to choose to live out of our experience of God, or are we going to go back to feeding the sheep? See, Peter, in his little encounter, he had a very real encounter with Jesus. He said, you are the Messiah, the Son of God. And then moments later, he's saying, whatever it takes for you to be Messiah, I'm not prepared to let it happen. He loses the plot. Moses has to decide when he understands that he's in the presence of the living God, is he going to be the servant of the living God, or is he going to go back to feeding his sheep? It's the same sort of decision that we face every day. Will we choose to live our life tomorrow out of what we understand today? Some days the burning bush is an incredible experience. I relate to the time often when I came home from the hospital, and there in our kitchen in the rectory at St Christopher's Church at Kilburn there was a burning bush, not a physical burning bush, but I had a very real encounter with the living God. I knew that God was saying to me at that time, your life will never be the same again. And this wasn't just some intellectual exercise. This was a fundamental spiritual touching of God, the Holy Spirit, of my soul. I have never been the same since that time. And many of us recall experiences like that. Some of them are really huge. The time of death of somebody close to us is also a time when we're very sensitive and very open to what God might be trying to do in our lives. We realise all sorts of things about what's important and what's unimportant, about where we should put our energies, about forgiveness, about love. That death can be a very rich time. It's why we must not try to avoid the sort of experiences that death and grief are involved with, and that we need to be open to what God might be trying to do. Will we then choose to live out of that experience, or will we just go back to feeding the sheep? This week, you might like to think about one of the days of the week. Take some time to just sit down and ask yourself that question: where have I experienced God's grace today? What is God saying to me through my encounter with God today? What will happen in my life? How will I live differently because of what I understand God to be for me today? The God who I experience as I am now, what will God be for me in the future? I am who I am invites me to walk with I will be who I will be. I hope you have a good week. I know that you are in the hands of the living God and that you can encounter God this week. The real question is whether when you see the burning bush, you'll turn aside and pay attention, take off your feet and listen to what I am is saying to you and live out of that encounter with the living God. See ya.